For generations, the image of naval power was defined by the majestic battleship or the swift aircraft carrier. Yet, the true workhorse of the world's navies, the vessel that continuously adapted to every new threat, is the destroyer. Its origins, often overlooked in the shadow of its larger brethren, stretch far deeper into history than many might assume. The modern destroyer, far from being a purely 20th century invention, has functional roots that reach back to the age of sail, to a class of ship known as the sloop. By the late 18th century, as the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars reshaped Europe, sloops, also known as corvettes, were indispensable. These were vessels of pragmatic utility, filling a multitude of critical roles across the vast, unforgiving oceans. They served as agile scouts, the eyes and ears of larger fleets, ranging ahead to detect enemy movements. They were guardians of trade, escorting vital merchant convoys, protecting the fragile lifelines of nations against opportunistic commerce raiders. And, when the opportunity arose, they themselves became predators, preying on enemy shipping. Sloops also performed vital courier service, carrying dispatches across oceans at the speed of wind. These ships, typically exceeding 100 feet in length and displacing between 400 and 600 tons, were built entirely of wood-sturdy oak, light fir, and resilient teak. Their structural integrity relied on a robust keel, curved frames forming the ribs, and layers of hull planks, carefully sealed with rope and pitch. Below the waterline, a crucial innovation introduced from the 1770s was copper sheathing. This protected the hull from rot and significantly reduced drag, allowing for greater speed and endurance. Armament on these sloops was functional rather than overwhelming. Light guns, typically 8 to 24 in number, mounted on a single gun deck. For many British Royal Navy sloops, the primary weapon by the time of the Napoleonic Wars was the 6-pounder gun. A significant enhancement was the introduction of the carronade around 1776. Developed by the Carron Company of Scotland, this short-barreled cannon was lighter than traditional guns and devastating at close range, making it ideal for the cut and thrust of engagements in confined waters. Propelled solely by the wind, sails harnessed to masts, either 3 for ship-rigged vessels or 2 for brig-rigged, these ships could achieve speeds in excess of 14 knots, remarkable for their era. The romanticized image of sailing ships often belies the grim reality of life at sea during the age of fighting sails. Conditions aboard sloops were exceptionally harsh, governed by necessity and a rigid discipline designed to maintain order in enclosed, dangerous environments. Sanitation was primitive. The ship's heads were rudimentary at best, often resulting in crewmen being forced to relieve themselves in the ship's hold during violent storms. Officers fared little better, often making do with chamber pots in their cramped quarters. Bathing, when it occurred, was typically in salt water, and soap was a rare commodity. The prevalence of lice spread typhus, a deadly disease that claimed countless lives. Discipline was brutal, a reflection of the absolute authority required to manage crews often composed of conscripts, prisoners, and desperate volunteers. Punishments in the British Royal Navy could be horrific. Flogging ranged from 100 to 1,000 lashes. Keel hauling, an agonizing ordeal where a man was dragged under the ship's hull, was a terrifying deterrent. For offences deemed severe enough mutiny or cowardice, capital punishment was meted out. Sailors facing the gallows, officers facing the gallows, the firing squad. Yet, despite these hardships, sloops performed vital strategic roles. For nations like Great Britain, whose very survival depended on overseas supplies, effective commerce protection was paramount. Sloops travelled with merchant convoys, maintaining order and warding off opportunistic enemy raiders. Conversely, they also engaged in commerce raiding themselves. The British sloop Netley, between 1798 and 1800, armed with powerful 24-pounder carronades, successfully captured merchantmen in the English Channel and off the coasts of Spain and Portugal. They were crucial in implementing blockades, strangling enemy coastlines to prevent the entry or exit of vital supplies. The British blockade of France, for instance, denied Napoleon's empire sea access, aiming to starve its war effort. In retaliation, Napoleon's continental system, an embargo on British goods, ultimately backfired, leading to a rebellion in Russia that proved a turning point in his campaigns. Sloops were also hunters, tasked with tracking down and engaging enemy commerce raiders, as exemplified by the British sloop Cherub, which, alongside the frigate Phoebe, pursued the formidable US-4 bid for PG, pursued the formidable US-4 Edua, frigate Essex during the War of 1812. Combat in the Age of Sail was a horrifying, visceral experience. Solid shot, fired from cannon, would not merely pierce a wooden hull, but splinter the timber, creating a storm of deadly shrapnel within the ship. Grape shot, a cluster of small metal balls, could sweep a main deck clean of personnel in an instant. Chain shot, 2 cannonballs joined by a chain, was designed to tear through rigging, but could slice men in half, and the most dreaded projectile, heated shot, could ignite a ship, threatening to detonate the powder magazines and send the vessel and its crew to a fiery oblivion. Contemporary accounts speak of decks running with blood, likening combat to a tremendous thunderstorm, carrying death in every flash. Surgeons operating in the dim, reeking confines of the sick bay performed crude amputations, yet infection and shock remained common causes of death. These technological limitations, and the sheer brutality of war at sea, began to give way to a new era. The invention of the steam engine by James Watt in 1769 laid the groundwork for a revolution in naval propulsion. However, early steam engines were too heavy and inefficient for wooden warships. Pioneering efforts like the French Pyroscap in 1783 and the British Kent in 1793, which employed steam-driven paddles, were largely experimental failures. Even the US Ides-to-Flat, Demologos of 1815, a catamaran design armed with 24 32-pounder guns, could only manage 5 knots. British steam vessels like the Rhadamanthus, laid down in 1831, displaced over 800 tons and utilized both steam and sails. But their early boilers were prone to explosion, and paddle wheels, while providing propulsion, were inefficient, vulnerable to enemy fire, and severely limited the placement of broadside weaponry. It was a slow, challenging transition, marked by many setbacks. The true turning point for steam propulsion at sea came with the screw propeller. Though Edward Shorter patented a 2-blade propeller in 1800, it was the independent designs of Francis Petit Smith and John Ericsson in 1836 that proved revolutionary. The Archimedes, launched in 1838, a 237-ton vessel, demonstrated the propeller's clear superiority in races against paddle-wheel ships in 1845, with the legendary tug-of-war between the screw-propelled Rattler and the paddle-driven Alecto. The Rattler pulled her rival at 2.8 knots, conclusively proving the screw propeller's immense power. The advantages were undeniable. Screw propellers offered greater speed and maneuverability, left broadsides unobstructed for more powerful weaponry, and were far less vulnerable to enemy fire than exposed paddle wheels. Crucially, they could even be fitted to existing sailing warships, accelerating the transition. This innovation effectively ended the age of fighting sail, laying the indispensable foundation for the faster, more heavily armed, and more adaptable warships that would eventually culminate in the modern destroyer. The age of wooden-walled vessels was drawing to an irreversible close. In 1850, France launched Le Napoleon, the world's first purpose-built, steam-powered, screw-propelled ship of the line. This vessel was a monumental stride, signaling a new era where wind became auxiliary and mechanical power supreme. New construction, like Britain's Jason Depp-class corvettes, completed in the 1860s, displaced over 2,000 tons, armed with powerful muzzle-loading guns, and could reach 12 knots. The shift was evident. Great Britain's fleet included 48 screw sloops and corvettes, France 34, and Russia 26, while the United States, though smaller, was also adopting the technology. This transition was not just about propulsion, it was fundamentally about materials. The limitations of wood against new explosive weaponry became starkly apparent. The move to iron hulls began tentatively. The Arun Manby, an ocean-going paddle-wheel steamer, launched in 1822, was the first iron ship to ply the seas. At just 106 feet long, it demonstrated a surprising resilience to groundings, foreshadowing iron's potential durability. A more definitive statement came with the Nemesis, completed in 1840. This first iron-hulled gunboat, 184 feet long, and displacing 660 tons, incorporated watertight compartments. Crucially, in combat, it proved impervious to numerous hits, withstanding 14 strikes in one engagement with no significant damage. This demonstrated iron's superior protection against traditional solid shot and its resilience to the elements. Yet, iron's initial brittleness and perceived unsuitability for larger warships meant progress was hesitant. The United States Stevens Battery, an ambitious but uncompleted ironclad from 1842, illustrated the early conceptual struggles. But the need for stronger materials was accelerating due to revolutionary advances in artillery. Colonel Henry Pahans of France developed the first truly reliable shell gun. Unlike solid shot, these shells were designed to explode inside a wooden hull, causing irregular, difficult-to-patch holes and vastly more destructive damage. Simultaneously, rifled guns, pioneered by Benjamin Robins in 1742 and gaining favor in the 1742-1850s, offered greater range and accuracy, adding spin to their projectiles. The destructive synergy of these new weapons was brutally demonstrated at the naval Battle of Sinope on November 30, 1853, during the Crimean War. Russian forces, equipped with Pahans shell guns, virtually annihilated an Ottoman squadron of wooden ships armed only with solid shot. This catastrophe renewed intense interest in iron, proving beyond doubt that the era of wooden warships was over. French floating batteries, wooden-hulled but with iron bolted to their sides, later validated this during the bombardment of Russian forts in October 1855, showing clear resistance to shell fire. During this transitional period, screw sloops still played critical roles, especially during the US's period. Civil War from 1861 to 1865. The Union's Anaconda Plan, a strategy relying on blockade and riverine operations, heavily utilized these vessels. The blockade proved devastating to the Confederacy, reducing vessel arrivals in southern ports from thousands in peacetime to mere hundreds in the war's final year. Key Union sloops, like the screw sloop Niagara and the 5 vessels of the Hartford class, were instrumental. The capture of New Orleans in April 1862, for example, was a pivotal Union victory, secured by a naval force of 17 ships, including 8 steam sloops and corvettes. Perhaps the most famous engagement involved the Union steam sloop Kearsarge, which, on June 19, 1864. Yet, even as naval warfare adapted to steam and iron, a new, even more terrifying weapon was about to emerge: the torpedo. Early underwater weapons existed. David Bushnell's floating mines in the American Revolutionary War in 1778 and Robert Fulton's mines in the early 1800s demonstrated destructive potential, with Fulton sinking a large captured vessel in 1805. But these lacked motive power, limited by currents or tethered. The U.S. onrise have 7 seconds. Civil War saw the advent of spar torpedoes, mines attached to a long boom, which offered offensive potential but were dangerously close quarters for the attacker. The Confederate submarine H.L. Hunley, on February 17, 1864, became the first warship to destroy another. The Union steam sloop Housatonic, using a spar torpedo, though the Hunley and her crew were also lost in the attack. The true revolution came in 1868 with the introduction of the Whitehead self-propelled torpedo. Developed by Robert Whitehead from Captain Giovanni Lupis's idea, the initial version carried a 300-pound explosive charge, propelled by compressed air at 370 psi, achieving a maximum speed of 7 knots with a range of 200 yards or 300 yards at reduced speed. Improved designs by 1868 expanded to 14 and 16-inch diameters, reaching 700 yards at 7 knots. This weapon, capable of striking below the waterline and delivering a crippling blow, created a terrifying new threat at even the largest battleships. Navies swiftly responded. The British Vesuvius, completed in 1874, was the first warship designed solely for torpedo attack. 90 feet long and displacing 245 tons, it featured a single bow torpedo tube, a very low freeboard, and expelled smoke from vents instead of a funnel to maintain stealth. However, at 9.7 knots, it was too slow to seriously threaten contemporary battleships. The Royal Navy's Lightning, launched in 1877, was a more effective torpedo boat, 87 feet long, designed for speed with a compound engine, achieving 19 knots, and crucially, utilized a steel hull. Steel construction, stronger and cheaper than iron, had been made possible by Henry Bessemer's furnace in 1856 and Pierre Martin's process in 1865. This allowed for lighter, stronger hulls that could accommodate more powerful and fuel-efficient compound steam engines. As torpedo range and speed advanced to 18 knots with a 600-yard range by the late 1870s, the threat intensified. France, unable to compete with Britain in battleship construction, developed the Junay-Cole doctrine, advocated by figures like Admiral Aubé. It proposed guerre de course or war on commerce using fast, numerous torpedo boats against larger fleets. This doctrine and the existential threat of the torpedo directly drove the need for a new class of vessel, the torpedo boat destroyer. The threat posed by torpedo boats, championed by France's Junay-Cole doctrine, was existential for Britain. Naval theorists like Greville articulated a clear strategy: target Britain's reliance on overseas food imports. By 1891, Britain imported an alarming 80% of its annual foodstuffs. The combined torpedo boat fleets of France and Russia, numbering a formidable 165 vessels by 1885, represented a credible threat to these vital maritime lifelines. Britain's initial response was the torpedo boat catcher. The Swift, launched in 1885, was an early attempt, displacing a mere 152 tons, armed with 3 14-inch torpedo tubes and 4 3-pounder guns. Later, the Rattlesnake class, completed in 1888, were larger at 550 tons, armed with a 5-inch breech-loading gun and 6 3-pounder weapons, and even incorporated a .75-inch protective deck. However, these catchers proved too slow. By 1887, French torpedo boats were reaching 20 knots, outpacing their intended interceptors. The sinking of the Chilean battleship Blanco in Calada in 1891 by the torpedo boat Almirante Lynch further highlighted the devastating potential of the self-propelled torpedo against armoured vessels. The urgency was clear. In March 1892, the visionary Admiral John Fisher established a design committee with a singular mission: to produce a new class of ship capable of 27 knots, a vessel fast enough to outrun and destroy torpedo boats. Thus, the torpedo boat destroyer was born. The first true destroyers, HMS Havoc and Hornet, were laid down in 1892 and completed in 1894 by Yarrow. Displacing 275 tons, they represented a significant leap. A critical innovation was the turtleback bow, designed to shed seawater over their low freeboard hulls. They were also among the first to utilize water tube boilers pioneered by France, which allowed for faster steam generation and increased reliability compared to older locomotive boilers. These 26-knotters quickly proved effective in fleet maneuvers, successfully overtaking torpedo boats, validating Fisher's bold visions. But the speed race was relentless. The French torpedo boat Vauban, launched in 1895, achieved a maximum speed of 29 knots, immediately raising the bar. Britain responded with 30-knotters completed between 1896 and 1902, warships like Thornycroft's Desperate, which displaced 310 tons and lived up to their name, achieving 30 knots. The advent of quick-firing guns, a concept stemming from an 1881 British Admiralty call for a gun capable of 12 shots per minute, further transformed close-quarters combat, and destroyers quickly incorporated them. This pursuit of extreme speed, however, came at a steep price. Early destroyer hulls were incredibly light, with plating often just 0.125 inches thick. Engine vibration, combined with the immense strain of high speeds in heavy seas, could lead to hull warping, splitting, and catastrophic flooding. The sinking of the destroyer Chamois after its propeller broke off was a grim reminder of these structural weaknesses. Commander Roger Keyes, a future admiral, recalled his destroyer's bridge being submerged feet deep in water during heavy seas, a terrifying testament to their poor seaworthiness. Then, a new propulsion technology promised even greater speeds. In 1897, Charles Parsons' experimental yacht Turbina stunningly demonstrated a speed of 34 knots at the Naval Review, showcasing the revolutionary potential of the steam turbine engine. The first naval vessel to be fitted with turbines, HMS Viper, commissioned in 1900, achieved an incredible 33.75 knots. Another turbine-powered destroyer, HMS Cobra, purchased the same year, was notable for having electrical lighting throughout, a rare luxury. Yet these early turbine engines had significant drawbacks. They were notoriously fuel inefficient, with Viper consuming 6 tons of coal per hour at just 22 knots. They also lacked a reverse gear, requiring separate reverse turbines, adding to complexity and weight. The inherent structural fragility of these early lightly built destroyers, combined with the immense power of the new engines, led to tragedy. HMS Viper sank after striking a reef in 1901. Even more catastrophically, HMS Cobra broke in half in heavy seas in 1901, highlighting the dangerous trade-off between speed and structural integrity. The pursuit of naval dominance was literally tearing ships apart. Life aboard these early destroyers remained profoundly harsh. The light construction meant a complete lack of insulation, leading to rampant condensation below deck. Ventilation was poor, and space was severely limited for the crew. Early designs still featured an open earth closet for men, offering little privacy or comfort. The arduous process of refueling, especially on smaller destroyers, blanketed the entire vessel in choking coal dust, further degrading living conditions. The development of the destroyer was a continuous, often brutal, process of trial and error. Each technological leap brought new problems to solve, but the fundamental purpose remained: to counter the evolving threats of a new age of naval warfare, and to do so with unparalleled speed. Despite their dangerous and often miserable living conditions, or perhaps because of them, the destroyer rapidly proliferated across the world's navies. The Royal Navy, recognizing the harsh realities of life aboard these lightly built ships, even offered hard-lying money to destroyer crews. The early years were fraught with risk. Stories abound of engine catastrophes, pistons breaking loose and punching through keels or main decks, or light hulls being sliced in half by larger warships in collisions. Britain's Havoc class served as the foundational model, but other nations quickly developed their own interpretations, each reflecting national strategic priorities and technological capabilities. France's Durandal class, launched around the turn of the century, measured nearly 190 feet, displaced close to 300 tons, and achieved 26 knots, armed with small guns and two 15-inch torpedo tubes. Russia, with its vast coastline, also adopted the destroyer concept, even incorporating mine-laying machinery into its domestically built vessels, a tradition that would prove significant in future conflicts. The Sokol, designed by Yarrow and completed in 1895, could reach over 30 knots and was even equipped with a ram, a vestige of older naval tactics. The United States, though initially slower to adopt, commissioned its first torpedo boat, the Farragut, in 1899. 214 feet long, it achieved 30 knots, armed with small guns and 18-inch torpedo tubes. The Bainbridge class of 1902, the first multiple-unit class, represented a deliberate step towards seaworthiness over sheer speed. At 250 feet long, 420 tons, and 29 knots, crucially it featured a raised forecastle, a design element that would prove transformative for habitability. Later, the Smith class of 1908 to 1909 became the first USUSA, destroyers with turbine engines, and the Paulding class of 1909 to 1910 were the first to employ oil-fired boilers, signaling an evolution in propulsion and fuel. The larger Cassing class, the 1,000-tonners, combined reciprocating engines for cruising with turbines for maximum speed, achieving 29 knots with 4 4-inch guns and 8 18-inch torpedo tubes. Germany's naval ambitions, driven by Kaiser Wilhelm II's Weltpolitik and influenced by theorists like Alfred Thayer Mahan, led to a rapid naval builder. The Second Naval Law of 1900 planned for 96 destroyers by 1920. Its first destroyer, D-10, completed in 1898, resembled British designs. However, the Des.9 class, launched between 1898 and 1901, diverged significantly. While achieving 26.5 knots, they prioritized strong hulls for seaworthiness and emphasized torpedo attacks with 3 17.7-inch tubes. Notably, they featured a raised forecastle, an innovation that improved life aboard and seaworthiness, a design element that Britain would soon emulate. Japan, an emerging naval power, embraced the French Jean École philosophy, contracting for torpedo boats from Yarrow in 1879. Its Shirakumo class, a British design, was over 216 feet long, displaced 342 tons, and reached 31 knots, carrying 2 12-pounder guns and 2 18-inch torpedo tubes. Italy, following its defeat at the Battle of Lissa in 1866, had scaled back naval expenditure. Its first Italian-designed destroyer, Fulmine in 1900, was smaller and slower than its contemporaries, reaching 24 knots against a designed 26.5. Even Austria-Hungary's Meteor of 1887, at 17.5 knots, was considered too slow for a true destroyer. A pivotal moment in destroyer design occurred after a British visit to Wilhelmshaven in 1901. The Royal Navy, impressed by the German raised forecastle, adopted it for their own designs. This led directly to Britain's River class, launched from 1902, which are widely considered the world's first truly ocean-going destroyers. At 233 feet long and 550 tons, they achieved 26 knots and boasted a cruising radius of 2,000 miles. Their single 12-pounder gun and 5 6-pounders were complemented by two 18-inch torpedo tubes. Admiral John Fisher continued to push the boundaries. He oversaw the Cricket class, launched from 1906 to 1909, small at 255 tons, but notable for being the first British destroyers to employ oil-fired boilers. This fuel switch offered greater speed, range, and operational flexibility. The Tribal class, including HMS Afridi, launched from 1907 to 1909, were much larger at 855 tons, powered by oil-fired turbine engines to achieve 33 knots, armed with two 4-inch guns and two 18-inch torpedo tubes. By the turn of the 20th century, the destroyer's role had shifted. No longer solely a defensive vessel against torpedo boats, it had evolved into a multi-purpose warship, capable of offensive torpedo attacks against capital ships, fleet screening, and even minor commerce raiding. This rapid evolution, combined with the escalating naval arms race between nations, particularly Great Britain and Imperial Germany, ensured that the destroyer, in its varied and ever-improving forms, would be at the forefront of the coming global conflict. The 2 decades leading up to the First World War were a trouble bedified in times of KISS, period of intense innovation and fierce competition in destroyer design. By 1914, the sheer scale of destroyer fleets was astounding. Great Britain possessed 228, Germany 154, Russia 105, France 84, the United States 54, Japan, demi, Italy 32, and Austria-Hungary 2,090s. Germany 15, France 84, the United States 54, Japan, demi, Italy 32, the unit de 4 and Austria-Hungary, demi, Italy 32, de 4, Japan, demi, Italy 30. A total of 703 combatant destroyers would enter the Great War, making them the most numerous type of warship globally. Admiral Fisher's ambition continued to drive experimental designs. His Swift class, launched in 1907, was an attempt at a larger, multi-role destroyer, but it proved a technological dead end, unable to achieve its desired 36 knots, with high fuel consumption and poor seaworthiness. It was a cautionary tale of pushing boundaries too far, too fast. Britain's River, Patch class, though successful, even reverted to the turtleback bow seen on earlier designs. The Beagle class of 1909 to 1910, 16 ships strong, were notable as the last British destroyers to be coal-fired, a temporary regression driven by fears of oil availability and strategic vulnerability. German destroyers, while generally well-built, continued to emphasize torpedo attacks and incorporated an auxiliary rudder beneath the bow for enhanced maneuverability. French designs like the Branle-Bas class even included a .715 deck armor for protection against small-caliber shellfire, a rare feature due to the weight it imposed. Russia's Novik, launched in 1911, was a technological marvel, the first Russian destroyer to use both turbines and oil fuel, achieving an impressive 36 knots. Other Russian classes, like the Bespoyny, even began incorporating small 1.8-inch guns for nascent anti-aircraft defense. Japanese destroyers, such as the Umikaze class, became true ocean-going vessels due to their increased size and the adoption of the raised forecastle. Italy's Indomitto class was its first to mount oil-fuel turbines, and Austria-Hungary's Tatra class were its first large destroyers and its first to use turbine engines. Across all navies, life aboard remained Spartan. Electrical lighting was often confined to engine rooms, and oil lamps provided dim illumination after sunset. Poorly preserved meat, often dubbed wooden meat by sailors, remained a harsh reality. Despite these rapid advancements, the pre-war combat experience of destroyers was limited and often inconclusive, a fact that frequently challenges common historical narratives. The 1900 Boxer Uprising saw destroyers in action, but not in their intended roles. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905 was considered the first true proving ground. Despite widespread destroyer involvement, torpedo attacks often yielded limited success, highlighting the gap between theoretical design and practical battlefield effectiveness. Though some destroyers were used for daring rescues, like the one that saved Admiral Zinovy Petrovich Rozdestovensky after the devastating Battle of Tsushima, their offensive impact was not yet fully realized. This changed abruptly on August 1, 1914, with the outbreak of World War I 4 days later. On August 5, 1914, the first naval shot of the war was fired by the British destroyer HMS. This global conflict would become the true crucible for the destroyer class, testing its designs, its crews, and its evolving capabilities on an unprecedented scale. Early engagements quickly redefined its utility. At the Battle of Helgoland Bight on August 28, on Bight as 28, 1914, British destroyers engaged in fierce surface combat. Their aggressive actions and the resulting German losses so alarmed Kaiser Wilhelm II that he severely restricted the German high seas fleet, fundamentally changing the course of the naval war. Destroyers, once seen primarily as specialized torpedo boats, would now be thrust into roles far beyond their initial design, becoming the indispensable, multi-role warships of the century's first global conflict. The First World War transformed the destroyer from a specialized torpedo boat hunter into a truly indispensable, multi-role warship, its utility far exceeding its initial design intent. It became the most numerous type of warship built, its adaptability crucial to victory. The primary catalyst for this evolution was the terrifying emergence of the submarine as a potent weapon against commerce. Germany's U-boat campaigns, aiming to starve Britain of its vital overseas supplies, necessitated a new class of vessel capable of countering this submerged threat. Destroyers, with their relatively shallow draft, were initially advantageous, able to pass over submerged torpedoes and proving surprisingly difficult targets for submarines. Their speed and maneuverability made them ideal for hunting, even attempting to ram submerged U-boats. Technological breakthroughs further enhanced their anti-submarine warfare, or ASW, capabilities. In 1916, the advent of the depth charge, a pioneering British weapon, revolutionized submarine hunting. Weighing 400 pounds with 300 pounds of high explosive, these charges detonated by a hydrostatic pistol, adjustable for depths from 25 to 300 feet, creating a devastating shockwave designed to crush U-boat hulls. The depth charge thrower, or DCT, projected these charges approximately 40 yards from the ship, allowing destroyers to attack without running directly over the submarine. By 1917, the introduction of crude hydrophones, underwater listening devices enabled destroyers to detect submerged vessels, though they lacked precise bearing or range. This capability, combined with the reintroduction of the convoy system in 1917, solidified the destroyer's role as the indispensable escort vessel, guarding merchant shipping across treacherous seas. The United States' entry into the war in April 1917 significantly boosted Allied destroyer strength. American shipyards mass-produced hundreds of vessels in the Wickes and Clemson classes, a production effort that ultimately exceeded 300 ships. Germany, in turn, built 95 destroyers across 11 classes, while Britain added 329 units to its fleet during the conflict. These numbers reflect the sheer demand for these versatile warships. Destroyers performed a vast array of duties. In November 1914, 2 British destroyers encountered German capital ships en route to bombard Yarmouth, their presence unnerving the Germans and compelling a reduction in the duration of the bombardment. During the Dardanelles campaign in 1915, destroyers provided crucial gunfire support for amphibious operations and even served as troop transports. Some later British M-class destroyer designs began to incorporate small 40mm pom-pom guns for use against aircraft, signaling the dawn of anti-aircraft capabilities. Even the concept of a larger high-speed command ship, or flotilla leader, a role Admiral Fisher had envisioned for his ill-fated Swift, was now recognized as essential. The Battle of Jutland, from May 31st to June 1st, 1916, the only major fleet engagement of the war, saw destroyers play a critical role in both attack and defense. When Admiral Reinhard Scheer, the German commander, ordered his destroyers to launch a torpedo attack to cover a retreat, the British commander, Admiral John Jellicoe, was forced to turn his entire battle fleet away from an impending attack. While torpedo successes remained limited, the destructive potential and the psychological impact of massed destroyer attacks was powerfully demonstrated, likely saving a portion of the German fleet. the human cost of this relentless warfare was immense. Britain lost 51 destroyers, the German High Seas Fleet 48, Russia 14, France 11, and Austria-Hungary 3. Even the US Society of Carrier 3, and Japan, who entered the war later, each lost 1. Destroyers were often the first into battle and the last to leave, bearing the brunt of naval engagements. By November 1918, with the armistice and the formal surrender of the German High Seas Fleet, the destroyer had irrevocably proven its worth. It emerged from the war not just as a specialized vessel, but as a truly indispensable multi-role warship, its importance cemented for all future naval conflicts. The end of the Great War brought not peace, but a new era of naval uncertainty, driven by economic realities, punitive treaties, and simmering ambitions. Destroyer production among the major naval powers diverged dramatically. Germany, the defeated power, faced catastrophic losses and severe restrictions. The armistice required the surrender of the bulk of its high seas fleet, which was interned at Scapa Flow. On June 21, 1919, in an act of defiance, the German crews scuttled their warships, among them 50 destroyers, the largest number of vessels sunk that day. The Treaty of Versailles cemented these losses, stipulating that Germany could have a maximum of only 12 destroyers in service at any one time, each limited to 800 tons of displacement. This rendered its navy a shadow of its former self, relegated to coastal defense. Meanwhile, the victorious powers grappled with different challenges. The United States, which had embarked on a massive wartime building program, finds itself completing a vast destroyer fleet. The mass-produced Wicks class was still under construction, and of the 156 Clemson-class destroyers, only 5 were complete by the armistice. The remaining 145 ships, launched between late 1918 and early 1921, effectively doubled the size of the U.S. Navy's destroyer fleet. To prevent a future naval arms race, the Washington Naval Conference convened in 1921 to 1922. It successfully limited the aggregate tonnage of capital ships, battleships, and aircraft carriers. Though a French proposal to extend tonnage limits to smaller craft was rejected, the treaty indirectly encouraged destroyer production by curtailing larger warships, shifting strategic focus. The capital ship tonnage ratios of 5-5-3 for the US, Britain, having Britain, such as Samar, and Japan, and 1.75 each for France and Italy, would shape naval building programs for years to come. Amidst this diplomatic jockeying, technological integration continued. The advent of sonar devices, first produced in 1918, began to be included in destroyers in the early 1920s, revolutionizing the detection and plotting of enemy submarines. Japan, facing limited resources and viewing the United States as a potential future adversary. Its 15 Mackay's Tat-class destroyers, launched between 1919 and 1921, were large at 1345 tons and remarkably fast at 39 knots. Armed with 4 4.7-inch guns, 6 21-inch torpedo tubes, and 20 mines, they were designed for both offensive operations and commerce warfare in the Pacific. 21 Moby Dick-class destroyers further bolstered their fleet. By 1922, Japan had become a powerful naval force, with a focus on large, heavily armed destroyers that would prove pivotal. Italy and France engaged in their own naval arms race for influence in the Mediterranean. Italy, initially launching 14 ships based on older designs, later developed the 12 Navigati-class destroyers from 1928 to 1929. These ships were large for their type, at 1,900 tons, and fast at 38 knots, armed with 6 4.7-inch guns in triple-piece mounts, and 6 21-inch torpedoes in 10-2000. France, after initially scrapping 20 vessels, approved a new program in 1922. It launched the 12-ship Bourrasque class and 14 Ladroit-class vessels. The Ladroit displaced nearly 1,400 tons, could reach 33 knots, and carried 4 5.1-inch guns and 6 21.7-inch torpedo tubes. However, France also pursued super-destroyers like the Chacal class, over 415 feet long and displacing over 2,100 tons, and the Aigle class, even larger at 2,441 tons, armed with 5 5-inch guns and 6 21.7-inch torpedo tubes, capable of 36 knots. The Russian Navy, devastated by the Bolshevik Revolution and Civil War, was largely destroyed. The 1921 Kronstadt mutiny further crippled its capabilities, relegating it to army control and coastal defense only. British destroyer policy saw some WW1-era vessels like Stronghold and Thanet converted with aircraft catapults. The Amazon and Ambuscade, launched in 1926, served as prototypes for new British designs. This led to 19 ships of the A and B class launched from 1929 to 1930, displacing around 1,350 tons. They were armed with four 4.7-inch quick-firing guns, featuring improved gun shields, two 40mm pom-pom guns, and 8 21-inch torpedo tubes. The development of the Japanese Mutsuki-class ships, launched from 1925 to 1927, was particularly influential as they were the first to mount the 24-inch torpedo, pioneered by the Japanese. This powerful weapon, later known as the Long Lance, carried a 795-pound warhead and had a remarkable range of up to 22,000 yards at lower velocities. Then came the 20 Fubuki-class ships, launched from 1927 to 1930, a true design coup. These were large, at 1,750 tons, and fast at 38 knots. They were the first destroyers to house their main 6.5-inch guns in 3 twin-gunned turrets that could elevate up to 75 degrees, giving them dual-purpose anti-air capability. They also featured director control for gun aiming and an impressive 9 24-inch torpedo tubes. However, their hulls and bridges were lightly built, with bridges even using aluminum instead of steel, a compromise for speed and armament that would later prove problematic. To manage this growing naval competition, the London Naval Treaty of 1930 attempted to impose specific limitations on destroyers for the first time. It set a maximum standard displacement of 1,500 tons for the majority of destroyers, though 16% of a nation's tonnage could be up to 1,850 tons. The maximum gun caliber was limited to 5 inches, and overall tonnage for signatory powers was capped at 150,000 tons each. This treaty, while aiming for control, would profoundly influence and at times complicate destroyer design in the years leading up to the next global conflict. The brief, fragile hope of naval arms control, epitomized by the London Treaty of 1930, swiftly began to unravel. France and Italy, relying heavily on destroyers for their naval strategies, refused to sign the treaty due to its restrictions, immediately creating a loophole for unchecked development. International tensions were escalating, and with them, the global naval arms race intensified dramatically. In the United States, growing concerns over Japanese imperial expansion in Asia directly influenced destroyer design. The Farragut-class ships, 9 vessels launched from 1934 to 1935, were the first post-double design, displacing 1,358 tons, armed with 5.5-inch guns and 8 21-inch torpedo tubes. They set a new benchmark for speed at 30 tubes. These were followed by the 8 Porter-class ships, launched from 1935 to 1936, dubbed the first US No 1936, dubbed the first US super-destroyers. Displacing over 1,800 tons, they carried a formidable 1,800 tons in fully enclosed twin mounts. The Somers-class ships, launched from 1937 to 1938, were even larger, displacing over 2,000 tons and carrying an impressive 8 5-inch guns and 12 21-inch torpedo tubes, a clear sign that the era of arms limitation was ending. Japan, driven by its own imperial ambitions, the invasion of Manchuria in 1931, and escalating aggression in China leading to outright war in 1937, announced in August 1934 its intent to abrogate the Washington Treaty, a stark signal of its departure from any form of arms control. The Akatsuki-class destroyers, launched from 1931 to 1932, similar to the Fubuki, experimented with electric welding for hull plates, a weight-saving technique that proved problematic. The 6 Hatsuharu DAP-class ships were the first designed to conform to the London Treaty, yet still carried 5 5-inch dual-purpose guns and 9 24-inch torpedo tubes. Later classes, such as the 10 Asashio 1936 to 1937 and 18 Kagaro by war outbreak classes, were even larger, with the Kagaro designed to be more stable after a 1935 typhoon endangered earlier. Top-heavy destroyers. In the Mediterranean, the refusal of France and Italy to adhere to destroyer restrictions ignited a fierce rivalry. French super-destroyers reached unprecedented scale. The 6 Vauquelin class, 1931 to 1932, displaced over 2,400 tons. The 6 Le Fantasque class 1934 to 1935 were over 434 feet long, displaced 2,569 tons, and could reach astonishing speeds of over 37 knots, with Le Terrible famously exceeding 45 knots on trials. They carried 5 5-inch guns and 9 21.7-inch torpedo tubes, bordering on light cruiser size. The 2 Mogador, Patey-class ships, launched from 1936 to 1937, were the largest superdestroyers ever built at 2,884 tons, armed with 8 5.5-inch guns and 10 21.7-inch torpedo tubes. Italy countered with its own designs, like the small, fast Folgore class of 1931, and its most successful type, the 12 Soldati class 1937 to 1938, displacing over 1,600 tons, armed with 5 4.7-inch guns and 1,610 in 78-200 tons 1 years to be, displacing probably. A crucial forward-looking development was the Pegaso class, an early progenitor of the escort destroyer. These smaller vessels at 840 tons were specifically equipped with 6 depth-charge throwers, a clear portent of the anti-submarine warfare specialization to come. The rise of Adolf Hitler in Germany, with his platform to dismantle the Treaty of Versailles, further destabilized Europe. The failure of the Second London Conference 1935 to 1936, with Japan's walkout over tonnage parity, marked the definitive end of effective naval arms control. Hitler formally repudiated the Treaty of Versailles, and in June 1935, Britain signed a controversial naval pact with Germany, implicitly accepting and even facilitating German rearmament. This led to the blueprint for Nazi Germany's Navy, the 1934 class. Destroyers, though their high-pressure steam plants were prone to breakdowns, leading to instability. The 1936 class, launched later, improved seaworthiness with a distinctive clipper bow and displaced over 1,800 tons, capable of 40 knots. Stalin's desire to re-establish the Soviet Union as a naval power, justified by German rearmament, led to a significant destroyer program. The 22 Genevni class, launched by late 1939, were based on an Italian design, displacing over 1,850 tons, armed with 4 5.1-inch guns and 6 21-inch torpedo tubes, and notably carried 56 mines, continuing the Russian mine-laying traditions. The 16 Storozhavoy class, wholly Russian designs, were even larger. During this interwar period, destroyers often undertook humanitarian duties, such as British destroyers screening the evacuation of the Greek army in 1922. They patrolled during crises like the Spanish Civil War from 1936 to 1939, where British destroyers provided humanitarian assistance and evacuated civilians, sporting distinctive identification bands of paint. Life aboard gradually improved with expanded wardrooms and bathrooms, and more stable hull designs reduced pitching and rolling, though hardships persisted. By September 1939, on the eve of World War II, the world's navies had amassed formidable destroyer fleets. Great Britain possessed 247 operational destroyers, the United States 149, Japan 116, Italy 47 cars, the Germany 37 cars 149, Japan 169, Japan 116 ones. Other nations, from the Netherlands to Argentina, also built their own destroyer forces. The competitive interwar rearmament had created powerful and diverse destroyer fleets, poised for the deadliest global conflict in history. In the vast, brutal canvas of World War II, destroyers, though often overshadowed by the colossal battleships or the burgeoning aircraft carriers, were the indispensable workhorses of naval warfare. They adapted to every new threat, from submarines to aircraft, performing a staggering array of critical operations that directly contributed to Allied victory. The war began on September 1, 1939, with Germany's invasion of Poland, and Hitler's territorial expansionist aims quickly drew in major powers. Germany's navy, the Kriegsmarine, was small and unprepared, its ambitious Z-plan construction program still years from completion sighed. This compelled Hitler to rely heavily on commerce raiding, primarily through his U-boat fleet, immediately elevating the Battle of the Atlantic to a central theatre. For Britain, whose very survival depended on overseas supplies, this was an existential threat. The reinstitution of the convoy system placed destroyers at the forefront of protecting vital merchant shipping. President Franklin D. President Franklin D. President Franklin D. due to his elder May. Roosevelt, responding to British Prime Minister Winston Churchill's desperate appeals, authorized U.S. naval forces to escort British merchant vessels even before America officially entered the war. Technological innovations dramatically enhanced the destroyer's anti-submarine capabilities. Sonar, originally developed as A.S. Dick in W.W. Wine, was now operational, allowing destroyers to detect submerged U-boats. The depth charge, a W.W. Wine innovation, was continuously refined. A critical turning point occurred on May 9, 1941, when HMS Bulldog seized German U-boat codebooks, an intelligence coup that allowed the Allies to break crucial German ciphers, providing invaluable insight into U-boat codebooks. Later, the Hedgehog launcher, operational by January 1942, fired 24 bomblets, each with 31 pounds of high explosives, detonating only on direct contact, proving highly effective. It ultimately destroyed 50 submarines. The human cost was severe. The U.S. of Rioway, the U.S. Estimant Flat, the U.S. Adur, destroyer Reuben James, escorting a convoy of 44 merchant ships to Iceland, was hit by a torpedo from U-562 on October 31, 1941. Only 45 of her 160 crew survived, a stark reminder of the Atlantic's perils. In a crucial lifeline for Britain, the Destroyers for Bases deal on September 3, 1940, saw 50 older US WW-era destroyers transferred to Britain in exchange for 99-year leases on British bases. Destroyers were also instrumental in early surface engagements. At the Battle of Narvik in April 1940, British destroyers clashed fiercely with their German counterparts. In one remarkable incident, HMS Glowworm heroically rammed the German heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper, causing significant damage and forcing the cruiser to return for repairs, a testament to destroyer courage. The subsequent battles saw HMS Hardy, led by Captain B.A.W. Down as official, Warburton Lee, engage a superior German force, though both Warburton Lee and his ship were lost. One of the most extraordinary operations was Operation Dynamo, the Dunkirk evacuation in May 1940. Amidst a 69 three-ship armada, destroyers served as vital troop carriers, evacuating 250,000 trapped British soldiers. The British destroyer HMS Keith, struck by two 1,000-pound bombs, sank after evacuating approximately 700 soldiers and providing crucial gunfire support. In the Mediterranean, destroyers faced relentless air attacks. During the evacuation of the King of Greece and 43,000 troops from Greece in April 1941, 2 destroyers were lost to air attacks. A month later, during the evacuation of Crete, 6 British destroyers were sunk by German ground-based aircraft, highlighting the growing threat from the skies. Yet they also delivered decisive blows. At the Battle of Cape Matapan on March 28-29, 1941, 13 British destroyers, equipped with superior radar, a technology notably absent from the 17 Italian destroyers and cruisers, played a crucial role in sinking Italian cruisers and destroyers. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, brought the United States into the war, shifting the global focus. The US into the global focus, the US into the Brabering. Destroyer Ward fired the first American shots of the war, destroying a Japanese midget submarine outside Pearl Harbor. With aircraft carriers now ascendant as capital ships in the Pacific, the role of destroyers evolved once more. Their anti-aircraft capabilities became paramount, serving as vital screens for carriers. Later in the war, at the Allied invasion of Normandy in 1944, 8 Pulu destroyers participated in Operation Overlord, providing essential gunfire support and escort for landing craft. In the Pacific, Japanese destroyer formations like the 15 vessels serving as anti-aircraft screens for Admiral Takeo Kurita's force at the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944 underscored their defensive utility. The cost was often devastating. At the Allied invasion of Okinawa from April to June 1944, destroyers were sunk by relentless kamikaze attacks while performing their critical anti-aircraft screening duties. Even in the war's final days, destroyers performed humanitarian roles, evacuating 45,000 refugees from East Prussia on May 5, 1945. From the freezing waters of the Atlantic to the fiery skies of the Pacific, destroyers proved their versatility and resilience. They were often the first into harm's way, and their adaptability and willingness to undertake any mission made them truly indispensable to Allied victory. The Second World War was the true proving ground for the destroyer, confirming its indispensable versatility across every theatre of naval conflict. Often performing roles far beyond their original design, they truly were the workhorses of the fleet, their adaptability proving vital to the Allied victory. Nowhere was this more evident than at the Battle off Sana in October 1944, part of the larger Battle of Leyte Gulf. Force, comprising escort carriers, 3 destroyers and 4 escort destroyers, faced the overwhelming might of a Japanese battle group. 4 battleships, including the colossal Yamato with its 18.1-inch guns, 6 heavy cruisers, and 10 destroyers. Against such impossible odds, the US destroyers and 10 destroyers carriers. Destroyers and escort carriers launched a desperate heroic attack. The destroyer Hool, for example, endured over 40 direct hits from various Japanese gun calibers. Their fearless suicidal charges, though incurring heavy losses, confused the Japanese admiral who mistakenly believed he was engaging a much larger force. This incredible bravery saved the US. The US defended such a being the much larger force. This incredible bravery saved the US to prize troops on Leyte, leading to the reconquest of the Philippines and critically crippling the Japanese war machine by cutting its vital supply lines to the resource-rich East Indies. On the other side of the Pacific, Japanese destroyers proved their ingenuity in logistical support. During the grueling Guadalcanal campaign, Rear Admiral Raizo Tanaka, regarded as the most accomplished Japanese destroyer leader of World War II, masterminded the Tokyo Express. This innovative resupply operation, beginning on the night of August 17, 1942, used destroyers' speed and stealth to ferry thousands of troops and essential supplies to the island. Transporting 20,000 troops to Guadalcanal in October 1942 alone. They even developed a unique method of dropping rubberized containers of supplies into the water for troops to retrieve, and were later used to evacuate the 13,000-man garrison in February 1943. However, the devastating effectiveness of Japanese naval tactics was demonstrated earlier at the Battle of the Java Sea on February 27, 1942. Here, an Allied ABDA command force of 5 cruisers and 9 destroyers met a Japanese force of 4 cruisers and 14 destroyers. The superior range and destructive power of the Japanese Long Lance torpedo proved decisive. The ABDA force suffered catastrophic losses. 2 cruisers and 4 destroyers were sunk. This battle decimated ABDA command, leaving Southeast Asia devoid of any significant Allied naval presence and highlighting the critical need for superior torpedo and anti-aircraft capabilities. The industrial capacity of the United States and the United Kingdom proved overwhelming. The USB was intended vehicles cited Jaces devoid. Navy commissioned 95 Benson-Jagleves-class destroyers between November 1939 and February 1943. The Fletcher class was the largest group ever produced, with 178 commissioned by September 1944. These powerful vessels, over 376 feet long and displacing over 2,000 tons, boasted 5-inch guns, a formidable array of anti-aircraft weaponry including 4 1.1-inch and 4 20mm AA guns, and 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, all while achieving 38 knots. Later came the Allen Sumner class, 59 of which were commissioned by late 1944, and the 105 Gearing class, designed for extended Pacific operations with larger hulls and 6 5-inch guns. Continuous wartime experience drove rapid technological advancements and refits. Radar, initially deployed on larger U.S. vessels in 1937, was small enough for destroyers by 1941. Anti-aircraft armament was dramatically upgraded with the Swiss Oerlikon 20mm gun and the Dutch 40mm Bofors gun, first at sea in July 1942. Often, destroyers sacrificed a main gun mount to accommodate these crucial new AA weapons, demonstrating the shifting priorities of naval warfare. The relentless submarine threat in the Battle of the Atlantic also led to the development of specialized escort vessels. USA escort destroyers at around 1,210 50 tons were designed primarily for ASW, mounting 3 3-inch guns, Hedgehog systems, and numerous depth-charge throwers. Similarly, U.S. depth-charge throwers, frigates, larger at 1,500 tons, were solely dedicated to escorting merchantmen. The British pioneered the Hunt-class escort destroyer, with 23 units built by 1940, smaller at 1,000 tons, but heavily armed with 4 4-inch guns and 50 to 110 depths charges, achieving 28 knots. Japanese destroyer designs, often based on the successful Fubuki, also evolved. The Akitsuki class was specifically designed as fast anti-aircraft escorts for their carriers, mounting 8 3.9-inch dual-purpose guns. The Tachibana class served as escort destroyers. However, many Japanese destroyers, though refitted with additional AA guns, suffered from stability issues due to the added weight, and their radar systems remained inferior to those of the Allies. By the war's end, destroyers were the most produced warship type, a testament to their unparalleled utility. Their ability to screen fleets, hunt submarines, provide gunfire support, transport troops, and even perform daring rescues solidified their status as the truly indispensable backbone of modern naval power. The end of World War II left the world's navies in a state of profound flux, but the destroyer's indispensable role was beyond question. Yet the cost had been immense. Japan lost 137 destroyers, Great Britain 101, Italy 69, the United States 56, Germany 33, and the Soviet Union 26. These were not mere statistics, they represented untold human sacrifice under the harshest conditions imaginable. Life aboard destroyers remained brutal. On some Royal Navy vessels, there simply wasn't enough space for all hammocks below deck, forcing men to sleep on the main deck, exposed to the elements. Crews relied on canned food and hard biscuits due to limited storage, with fresh water often restricted to cooking and drinking, severely impacting hygiene. The thin hull plates meant shrapnel ripped through from near misses, causing horrific injuries or death. Destroyers could sink in mere minutes, leaving crews below deck little time to escape the darkness and chaos. The aftermath of the Battle of Midway provided a grim illustration. The U.S. destroyer Hammond sank in minutes after being hit by a Japanese submarine, her own depth charges detonating underwater and killing many of the crew already in the water. Even nature proved a deadly adversary. In December 1944, the U.S. Third Fleet encountered a typhoon with 70-foot waves and 110-knot winds, causing 3 destroyers to lose stability and sink when water flooded down their funnels. The immediate post-war years saw navies adapting. The U.S. adapting. Converted 18 Fletcher-class destroyers into Archie-Angoing destroyer escorts, or DDEs specializing in anti-submarine warfare. These received advanced sonar and replaced their 5-inch guns with the new Weapon Alpha, a rocket-boosted depth charge system developed in 1946, firing at 200 yards of the more warfare 1846. Britain's Daring class represented the culmination of its wartime design, armed with 4.5-inch guns, 40mm Bofors, 10 torpedo tubes, and the Squid ASW launcher firing a salvo of 6 300-pound bombs. But a new geopolitical landscape was emerging: that Cold War. The Soviet Union's detonation of its first atomic bomb in 1949 created an existential threat, and its rapid naval expansion sent shivers through Western capitals. The Soviet Skory class, launched in large numbers with 72 units in the early 1950s, was nearly 400 feet long, armed with 4 5.1-inch guns, extensive anti-aircraft weaponry, and 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, a clear sign of Soviet ambition. In response, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, was formed in 1949 as a military alliance against the Soviet Union. The Soviets countered with the Warsaw Pact in 1955. The US has responded with specialized vessels. The Norfolk, originally designated a cruiser, but becoming the first destroyer leader, was large and costly at $61 million, designed for ASW. The Mitchell class, smaller but still expensive, focused on anti-submarine systems. The Dealey class, smaller destroyer escorts launched from 1952 to 1958, were explicitly dedicated to ASW with 4 3-inch guns and the Weapon Alpha system. European nations, devastated by the war, relied on external aid. France's 1946 destroyer fleet consisted of only 11 vessels, 9 of which were former German ships transferred to France. Italy's peace treaty prohibited new construction before 1950 and limited its total tonnage. Through the Mutual Defense Assistance Program (MDAP), France received 4 Italian and 8 USS Astinces program destroyer escorts, while Italy received 2 US Benson/Gleaves class and 3 Cannon class destroyers/escorts. The Dutch also acquired US destroyer escorts and built their own Holland class, displacing over 2,200 tons, armed with four 4.7-inch guns and ASW mortars. The greatest catalyst for change, however, was the dawn of the missile age. The Soviet atomic bomb in 1949 and the subsequent development of jet aircraft and nuclear weapons posed a new threat that traditional ship gunnery could not counter. The US began its Bumblebee missile program in 1944, developing the three Ts, the Terrier, Talus, and Tatar surface-to-air missiles, or SAMs. The Terrier missile, entering service in late 1955, was 27 feet long, weighed nearly 1,300 pounds, and reached Mach 1.8, the first guided missile cruisers, USS the Massal cruisers. Boston and Canberra, converted World War II Baltimore-class vessels, were recommissioned on November 1, 1955, ushering in the missile age for surface vessels. The world's first guided missile destroyer, the Gayet, a Gearing-Tate-class vessel, was recommissioned on December 1, 1956, as a testbed for the Terrier system, even incorporating the British Denny Brown stabilization system to ensure missile launch stability. The US LV then built the Coons, Tatch-class guided missile escorts, 10 ships built between mid-1957 and late 1961, displacing 4,167 tons, designed with Terrier SOC system. AS Auric, first deployed in 1960, fired homing torpedoes from an 8-missile launcher with an effective range of 10,000 yards. The 23 Charles F. Adams class, completed from 1960, were armed with Tatar SAMs designed for closer defense. The longest-range SAM, the Talus, with a 57-mile range and Mach 2.5 speed, was reserved for larger cruisers. The Soviet Union, under Khrushchev's leadership after 1953, also shifted naval priorities, emphasizing missile technology over guns. They fired their first submarine-launched ballistic missile in September 1955 and developed the world's first surface-to-surface missile, the SSN-1B, in the late 1950s. This massive missile, 25 feet long with a 15-foot wingspan and a 150-mile range, was deployed on the Kildin and Krupny-class missile destroyers. Despite Western alarm, the SSN-1 had a significant drawback, an unreliable warhead release system designed to detonate below the waterline, which often reduced its hit probability. Even with these early limitations, the missile age had arrived, fundamentally transforming naval warfare. Britain's Admiralty, recognizing the obsolescence of gun-armed ships, shelved its 1953 gun-armed destroyer design in 1955, opting to convert R-class destroyers into frigates with modern radar and sonar. The Soviet Torlin and Koldin classes continued to advance their gun-armed destroyer designs, but the era of large-scale gun-focused destroyers was drawing to a close. The future of naval power would be defined by guided missiles and the complex electronic systems required to launch and control them. The post-World War II naval arms race, especially in the destroyer and frigate classes, was a furious sprint of technological innovation, fueled by the escalating geopolitical tensions of the Cold War. Both the United States and the Soviet Union sought naval superiority, driving an evolution in weapon systems and propulsion technologies, while other NATO nations adapted their shipbuilding strategies to balance economic constraints with strategic needs. The development and deployment of Soviet ship-to-surface missile systems, despite their early operational limitations, sounded alarms in the West. They prompted a decisive shift towards missile destroyers, as traditional gun-armed warships were seen as increasingly obsolete. The perceived threat of a growing Soviet ballistic missile submarine fleet and a large surface fleet compelled the USSR to rapidly expand its destroyer program and modernize existing vessels. The high cost of advanced technologies like nuclear propulsion and complex missile systems forced naval planners to balance capability with affordability. This led to the rise of smaller, more numerous frigates alongside larger, more expensive destroyers. Geopolitical shifts and a desire for greater independence in defense also spurred national research and development programs, particularly in France. By 1952, the US had reconstructed 12 Gearing-20-class destroyers into radar picket destroyers, or DDRs, with enhanced radar for early warning against Soviet bombers. The 18 Forrest Sherman class, laid down in response to the air threat, were completed by November 1955, displacing over 2,700 tons and capable of 33 knots. Britain, meanwhile, converted its World War II R-class destroyers, such as Rocket and Relentless, into frigates in 1952, equipping them with aluminum superstructures and modern radar and sonar to meet the growing anti-submarine threat. These frigates were armed with two 4-inch guns, 40mm anti-aircraft guns, homing torpedo tubes, and two Squid ASW systems. European allies, devastated by the war, relied heavily on US's aid through the Mutual Defense Assistance Program. France acquired 4 Italian Oriani and Soldati-class destroyers, and 8 US-class destroyers and 8 US Charge Cannon Tut-class destroyer escorts. Italy received 2 US-2 Benson/Gleaves class and 3 Cannon-class destroyers/escorts by 1951, tasked with Mediterranean defense. The Dutch, focused on ASW defense, acquired 6 USU defense, acquired 6 US Timey, Hekeprage, Cannon Tuller-class destroyer escorts, and built their own Holland Tuller-class, 4 ships 1950 to 1955, displacing over 2,200 tons, armed with 4 4.7-inch guns and ASW mortars. A profound turning point was the successful development and deployment of Soviet ship-to-surface missile systems. Despite their previously mentioned limitations, including guidance issues and a difficult manual loading process, they fundamentally shifted Western naval perceptions. The most revolutionary development was nuclear-powered propulsion. The USS Nautilus, the world's first nuclear submarine, launched in 1954, offered unprecedented endurance and operational flexibility. This led to nuclear-powered surface vessels like the USS Nautilus Fakio, Long Beach, and the Bainbridge, ushering in a new era of practically unlimited range to counter the sheer numbers of Soviet destroyer production, including the improved Tolin and Kolden classes, with the latter comprising 27 ships. The USR launched the ambitious Fleet Rehabilitation and Modernization, or FRAM, program in 1958. This critical effort extended the life and capability of aging World War-era destroyers, modernizing them with new sensors and ASW weapons like AS Rock. These upgrades were vital given the scale of Soviet production. France, meanwhile, made a strategic decision to prioritize domestically developed missile technology, spurred by President Charles de Gaulle's push for independence from the US technology, This redirected its naval development, leading to unique French designs. This intense naval arms race directly mirrored the broader technological and strategic competition of the Cold War. It led to a significant shift in naval design towards missile-armed destroyers and frigates, away from traditional gun-based platforms. The economic realities heavily influenced naval construction, leading to the rise of smaller, more numerous frigates alongside larger, more expensive destroyers. The development of nuclear propulsion revolutionized naval operational capabilities, but also introduced new safety and cost concerns. The destroyer, ever adaptable, was once again at the forefront of a global military transformation. The United States Navy recognized the changing battlefield. It embarked on a new era of warship design. The USS Guyot, a refitted World War II-era vessel, proved the concept. It was the first guided missile destroyer, recommissioned in 1956. This success paved the way for purpose-built missile platforms. The Leahy-class destroyers led this new generation. They entered service by mid-1962. Designed for anti-air duty, their primary armament was 2 Terrier SAM launchers. Each launcher carried 40 missiles. These vessels measured 533 feet long. They had a beam of 53 feet 4 inches. They displaced 5,146 tons. The Leahy class also carried 1 ASISI launcher. 6 12.75-inch torpedo tubes provided anti-submarine capability. Their speed reached 32 knots, manned by a crew of 377. Following closely, the Belknap class further refined these roles. Completed between 1964 and 1967, they focused on ASW defense. The Belknap class featured a modified Terrier system. This system was capable of both SAM and ASRUP deployment. 1 5-inch gun, 2 3-inch guns, and torpedoes completed their arsenal. Beyond missile development, nuclear propulsion reshaped strategic thinking. The USS Nautilus, commissioned in 1954, demonstrated nuclear endurance. The USS Long Beach followed in 1961. It was the world's first nuclear-powered surface warship. This pioneering spirit extended to frigates. The USS Bainbridge, a nuclear-powered frigate, was laid down in 1959. It was completed in 1962. The Bainbridge measured 565 feet long. It had a beam of 56 feet and displaced 7,250 tons. Propulsion came from two General Electric D2G model nuclear reactors. Its reactor compartment was immense. It stood 37 feet high and 31 feet wide. This section alone weighed 1,400 tons. The frigate achieved a speed of 30 knots. Its crew numbered 459 personnel. Armament included two Terrier SAM systems. One ASRECI launcher was also fitted. 6 12.75-inch torpedo tubes rounded out its offensive capabilities. Another nuclear-powered frigate, the USS Truxtun, followed. It was completed in 1967. The Truxtun came at a significant cost of $146 million. These nuclear vessels offered unparalleled endurance at a premium. To extend the life of its existing fleet, the U.S. Navy launched the FRAM program. The Fleet Rehabilitation and Modernization Program ran from 1959 to 1964. It refitted 131 World War II-era destroyers, FRAM-I targeted Gearing.class destroyers. This extended their service life by approximately 8 years. The cost was around $7.80 million per unit. Some 5-inch guns were removed during this overhaul. In their place, Gearing-class ships received ASRO SOC launchers. The innovative DASH system was also integrated. Improved radar and sonar capabilities became vital for Cold War operations. DASH, the drone anti-submarine helicopter, entered service in November 1962. This small, automated helicopter carried a homing torpedo for submarine attacks. It was controlled from the ship's Combat Information Center. DASH allowed destroyers to engage submarines far beyond traditional sonar range. The FRAM-2 program addressed Sumner-class destroyers. It extended their operational life by about 5 years. These refits cost approximately $4.70 million per unit. Sumner-class ships retained their 5-inch guns. They were fitted with Hedgehog mortars and DASH. While the West modernized, the Soviet Union rapidly developed its own naval power. Their early Soviet surface-to-surface missile capabilities faced hurdles. Over-the-horizon guidance issues limited their usefulness. This was especially true in vast ocean environs. Missile loading required manual labor. This process was particularly difficult in rough seas. Such conditions were common in Soviet operating areas. These challenges posed constant logistical difficulties. Despite these issues, new Soviet ship classes emerged. The Krupny class were formidable SSM-armed destroyers. Older vessels were also adapted for missile warfare. The Kaltin-class destroyer Bravey serves as an example. It was converted to carry the SAN-1 Goa SAM system. This missile measured 21 feet 7 inches long. It weighed 880 pounds with a 132-pound warhead. Its defensive range extended 17 miles. A new generation arrived with the Kashin class. These were 18 guided missile destroyers. They entered service in 1963. The Kashin class were the first dedicated anti-air defense ships in the Soviet Navy. Each vessel measured 472 feet 5 inches long. Their beam was 51 feet 10 inches. They displaced 3,750 tons. The Kashin class was designed for speed, reaching 37 knots. Armament included two SAN-1 launchers. ASW systems like the RBU-6000 and RBU-121 were fitted. 5 21-inch torpedo tubes were also present. 4 3-inch guns provided additional firepower. Propulsion for these ships came from gasoline-powered turbine engines. Smaller, but numerous, were the Petya-class frigates. 45 units were built between 1961 and 1969. These vessels measured 268 feet, 4 inches long. They had a beam of 30 feet 2 inches. They displaced 950 tons. Petya-class frigates were primarily ASW platforms. Their armament included 4 3-inch guns. ASW launchers, torpedo tubes, depth charge racks, and mines were carried. They could reach a speed of 32 knots. Across the globe, other nations responded to the evolving naval arms race. British naval development introduced its own dedicated escort destroyers. This was the County class. 8 vessels were built. The lead ship, HMS Devonshire, was completed in 1962. These ships measured 521 feet 6 inches long. Their beam was 54 feet. They displaced 6,200 tons. Propulsion came from a combined steam and gas turbine system. The County class was armed with the Sea Slug SAM launcher. The Sea Slug system entered service in 1962. The Mark I version had a 15 nautical mile range. It flew at Mach 1.8. This performance was similar to the US Terrier. An improved Mark II version followed in 1965. It boasted a 35 nautical mile range. For close-range threats, 2 Seacat SAM launchers were carried. The Seacat entered service in 1962. It was small and lightweight, measuring 1.48 meters long. Its range was 3 nautical miles, flying at Mach 0.9. 2 4.5-inch guns provided main battery firepower. 20 pieces offered close-in defense. An ASW helicopter completed their multi-role armament. Britain also built the Leander-class frigates. 16 warships were completed between 1963 and 1967. These frigates measured 372 feet long. Their beam was 41 feet. They displaced 2,350 tons. They could reach 28.5 knots. Armament included 2 4.5-inch guns. 2 40 MMA guns were fitted. 1 Limbo ASW system provided anti-submarine capability. A Seacat SAM launcher offered close-range air defense. French naval development also moved towards missile systems. Their Surcouf-class destroyers consisted of 12 ships. They were completed between 1955 and 1957. These ships still resembled pre-World War II designs. They measured 422 feet long. Their beam was 42 feet. They displaced 2,750 tons. Their armament was gun-heavy, featuring 6 5-inch guns, A guns, and torpedo tubes. They reached a speed of 34 knots. However, 4 units were later rearmamented with the US Tartar SAM system. This signaled a transition to missile warfare. The Suffren-class guided missile destroyers marked a new era. 2 units were laid down in 1962. They were completed in 1967. These vessels measured 517 feet long. Their beam was 51 feet. They displaced 5,335 tons. They were capable of 34 knots. Armament included 1 Malafan ASW launcher. 1 Mascura SAM launcher was fitted at the stern. The Malafan ASW system was deployed on La Galissonière in 1962. It fired a missile containing an ASW helicopter. This helicopter was housed in a Naval folding hangar. 2 3.9-inch guns, guns and torpedo tubes rounded out their capabilities. Italian naval development followed a similar path of modernization. The Impetuoso-class destroyers, 2 units, were completed in 1958. They measured 418 feet 9 inches long. Their beam was 43 feet 2 inches. They displaced 2,775 tons. Armament featured 4 5-inch guns. Guns, an ASW mortar, and torpedo tubes were also present. They reached a speed of 34 knots. The subsequent Improvido-class destroyers were similar. They notably included a Tartar SAM system. The Bergamini-class frigates were significant for their innovation. Though small at 308 feet 4 inches, they featured a landing pad aft. This enabled ASW helicopter operations from a compact platform. Technology, with modified Tartar SAM launchers and Harpoon SSMs, Japanese Haruna and Shirane-class destroyers, showcased Japan's return as a significant naval power and innovator, with the Haruna class being the first to carry 3 full-sized ASW helicopters. The Vietnam conflict from 1968 to 1975 saw U.S. destroyers and frigates serving crucial roles as escorts and in anti-air warfare. The USS Sterett and USS Biddle notably shot down Democratic Republic of Vietnam aircraft, and in Sterett's case, an anti-ship missile. The Falklands War in 1982 was a crucible of modern naval combat. The Argentine cruiser General Belgrano was sunk by a British submarine. The Argentine Air Force devastatingly employed French Exocet SSMs and bombs against the British task force. The destruction of HMS Sheffield by an Exocet SM highlighted its penetration capability and the tragic failure of damage control systems due to damaged water mains. HMS Coventry was also bombed and sunk, along with the destruction of frigates Ardent and Antelope. The British fleet claimed the destruction of 100 Argentine planes, a testament to the intensity of the air-sea battle. The vulnerability of aluminum construction was starkly demonstrated by the fire aboard HMS Sheffield and earlier incidents, such as a 1977 fire that nearly destroyed HMS Amazon, revealing the significant fire hazard posed by aluminum superstructures. The Soviet Kashin-class destroyer Otvazhny suffered an internal fire in 1974, leading to the detonation of its SAM magazine, resulting in catastrophic damage and its sinking. In 1975, the Soviet Krivak-class warship Storozhevoy faced an attempted mutiny, which was ultimately suppressed by Soviet jets, illustrating internal threats and Soviet responses. The Aegis combat system, its development and deployment on Ticonderoga-class cruisers and Arleigh Burke-class destroyers marked a true revolution in naval warfare, enabling simultaneous tracking and engagement of over 100 targets using the powerful ANS-PP-1 radar. The late Cold War and its immediate aftermath saw a significant technological and quantitative divergence in naval power between the United States and the Soviet Union. This period led to the US establishing clear dominance in advanced destroyer and frigate capabilities. Meanwhile, economic woes and strategic shifts reshaped global naval architectures. This technological superiority and altered geopolitical landscape directly impacted naval strategy and operations, particularly in regional conflicts. The Soviet economic decline and Mikhail Gorbachev's reforms directly led to the curtailment of Soviet warship construction and a drastic reduction in seaborne operations, severely weakening their naval presence. In contrast, US technological investment, specifically the development and deployment of advanced systems, like the Aegis combat system and the Tomahawk missile, created a significant qualitative advantage for US naval vessels. The post-Falklands War reassessment in the UK briefly spurred new construction, but this was later reversed by the end of the Cold War, demonstrating shifting strategic priorities. Regional conflicts such as the Iran-Iraq War and the Gulf War provided real-world testing grounds and demonstrated the critical roles of destroyers and frigates in escort duty, power projection, and offensive missile strikes, influencing subsequent procurement and doctrine. A significant turning point was the development and deployment of the Tomahawk cruise missile in 1986, representing a leap in offensive missile capability for the US Navy. Mikhail Gorbachev's rise to power in March 1985 signaled a dramatic shift in Soviet naval policy, prioritizing economic relief over expansive naval development. The Iran-Iraq War's impact on shipping in the Arabian Gulf forced the US to actively escort tankers, highlighting the enduring escort mission for destroyers and frigates, and leading to direct engagement. The attack on the USS Stark on May 17, 1987, was a stark, albeit unintentional, demonstration of the dangers faced by warships and a catalyst for stricter rules of engagement for USS for stricter rules of engagement. Advantages in this era were manifold. The Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, partially armored with Kevlar, powered by gas turbines, was capable of a top speed of 32 knots. The Tomahawk cruise missile, weighing 2,900 pounds, or 3,500 with its booster, and 18 feet 3 inches long, or 20 feet 6 inches with booster, carried a 1,000-pound warhead, either conventional or nuclear, and boasted an astonishing one. Tomahawk's guidance systems were highly advanced, including terrain contour mapping (TERCOM), global positioning system (GPS), and digital scene matching area correlation (DSMAC), providing extreme accuracy and low-altitude detection avoidance. The Aegis combat system, coordinating all ship weaponry, relied on large sensory panels for unparalleled awareness. For close-in defense, the Vulcan Phalanx gun, a 20 Gatling gun, was capable of firing 100 rounds per second, designed specifically for missile defense. In stark contrast, Soviet/Russian weaknesses mounted. A struggling economy by the 1980s led to severely curtailed construction. There was an increasing emphasis on smaller craft, such as the Krivak, Parchim and Grisha classes, suited for coastal defense rather than blue water operations. By 1991, many units were in a state of decay due to economic problems. By 2004, only one Kashin-class destroyer remained operational. The Tomahawk cruise missile was deployed in 1986. Mikhail Gorbachev came to power in March 1985. The Iran-Iraq War from 1980 to 1988 had a significant impact on shipping. On May 17, 1987, the USS Stark was attacked by French Exocet anti-ship missiles. On April 14, 1988, the USS Samuel B. Roberts struck a mine. Operation Desert Storm began on January 16, 1991, and in 1991 the Soviet Union collapsed. The Arleigh Burke-class destroyer displaces 8,315 tons. The Tomahawk missile boasted a 1,000-mile range. The Vulcan phalanx gun could fire at a rate of 100 rounds per second. Soviet construction still included 9 more Krivak-class frigates and 11 Parchim-class frigates at 769 tons each. British construction saw 10 broadsword-class frigates and the first 3 Duke-class frigates. The USS Samuel B. Roberts sustained a hole 15 feet by 20 feet from the mine strike. Post-Cold War U.S. production continued, with 48 additional Arleigh Burke-class vessels by 2004. By 2004, the post-Cold War Russian fleet included 15 Krivak-class frigates and 22 Grisha-class frigates in service. The post-Cold War Japanese fleet comprised 45 destroyers and 9 frigates by 2004. The Chinese fleet grew to 4 destroyers and 31 frigates by 2004. And the Indian fleet possessed 8 destroyers and 4 frigates. Captain Glenn Brindle of the USS Stark was unsuccessful in warning away the Iraqi fighter jet. The USS Arleigh Burke featured a 29-cell vertical launch system in the bow and a 61-cell vertical launch system aft. The USS Stark was hit by 2 French Exocet SSMs. The USS Samuel B. Roberts was struck by a mine, causing a hole 15 feet by 20 feet. The Spruance-class destroyer Fife launched an impressive 58 Tomahawk missiles during Operation Desert Storm. Despite the profound end of the Cold War, destroyers and frigates remain absolutely crucial naval assets for projecting power and responding to evolving global threats, particularly the insidious challenge of terrorism. However, their future strategic relevance is being significantly shaped by the high construction costs and the rise of smaller, more cost-effective frigates. The end of the Cold War, while dramatically reducing the threat of general armed conflict, paradoxically created an environment with new and persistent threats like global terrorism. The rising threat of global terrorism necessitated continued naval power projection abroad. The escalating construction costs of destroyers, compared to frigates, are undeniably influencing naval procurement strategies globally. A critical turning point was the terrorist attack on the USS Cole in Aden on October 12, 2000. This event starkly demonstrated the continued danger faced by even modern warships and their vulnerability to asymmetric threats, highlighting the persistent need for robust naval power projection. The September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks fundamentally shifted global priorities and intensified the war on terrorism, further underscoring the indispensable role of naval assets in projecting power and responding to these new threats. Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003 showcased the direct combat application of destroyers equipped with advanced weaponry like Tomahawk cruise missiles, reaffirming their strategic value. As a consequence,